Welcome back to the Daily Show here with Alan Pratt, who is the director of the National Rural Education Association, based in good old Chattanooga,
Yes, sir.
Tennessee, one of my favorite places to visit. And Alan, because you're here at the National Micro-Credential Summit, but this rural is such an important issue in America, and for us to understand rural communities, therefore rural education. So talk about what your organization is doing, and then we'll talk about micro-credentials
Yes,
also.
so we're the oldest organization, education-based organization in the U.S., founded in 1907. So we've been around a couple of years, and we're the voice of rural schools and rural communities across America. We have 42 state affiliates. We have members in all 50 states. So we feel like our touch and reaches on these rural communities and rural schools, and how we can help them, and how we can promote the work they're doing, and how we can share the work they're doing across other areas, so it could be replicated or used in other areas. So what's successful in rural Kentucky, good chance it could be successful in rural areas of the country.
Well, from my observation, and then from a lot of media accounts, it seems like rural has been forgotten, but has been rediscovered in the last decade or so.
Yeah, I think sometimes it goes and swings with presidential elections and different elections across states. So I think we are forgotten a lot of times, and sometimes we are overlooked. But our important role is the suburban areas and urban areas, they rely on rural America. And they rely on rural America more than they ever would think about it. So,
and then we know that the definition of rural, or the terminology, will change. And so some communities that were classified as rural, the government and other entities can redefine that role, and then that makes it challenging when you start looking at data too.
Yeah, and I think if you're going by what the government declares as rural or not rural, that can be tricky. That's good for grants and other things you're doing with the government, but we kind of come by this rule that if you think you're rural, you're rural. And that's how we go through it. So it's not a classification for us. It's a feeling, it's being a part of the community, and we feel like that if you think you're a part of that, you're with us.
And that's, Alan, that's a very important thing you just said there, because let's take the state of Kentucky. So many of the people that that lived and grew up in eastern Kentucky, a rural mountainous area, then they've moved to the bluegrass or other places. So they're living in an urban area, but really their heart is rural.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's so exciting about what the work that KVEC's doing in eastern Kentucky is they're trying to open up opportunities for those folks that did leave that want to come back and be successful and move back to their roots. Because I think, a lot of people do like living in the areas where they grew up and they feel comfortable, and I think that's important. And I think, that's the challenge for rural America moving forward, is how do we create the future for our small rural communities where we keep our young youth and our entrepreneurs at home, and so we can make it grow.
Let's tie that in then to specifically to our schools. What are those challenges and opportunities for our rural schools that may be different than in urban areas?
I think teacher shortage is one of the areas I think that's a strong focus. When you go across the U.S., there's teacher shortages in a lot of schools, urban and suburban, but rural is especially hard, especially in those high needs areas of the STEM education, and I think that's a big growing concern. And I think keeping those teachers when they come to rural America is also a challenge sometimes.
Well, we know if you work in a rural community, the statistics, whether it's in Kentucky or other states, you don't make as much as you do in an urban area. But if you've gone ahead and got your bachelor's and master's degree to teach, and you have some student loans to pay off that student loan debt, but you're not making as much money as you could in an urban area, so it's harder to pay off those loans.
Yeah, and I think funding and also salary or your salary in general for teachers is an issue, but I think the work environment, who they work for, and if they feel appreciated and feel like they're a part of the educational process, I think that goes a long way to being part of that community. Sometimes that can kind of overtake the need for salary, and people are more comfortable, and they may take a less salary to stay in those more comfortable and engaging environments.
Our director, Dr. Jeff Hawkins, is very innovative and creative, and he talks about the mountain ingenuity, about how, okay, you may not have quite as many resources, but you figure out you do have enough resources. We operate on a theory of abundance and not
Yeah.
of poverty, and so that we can do some things almost forced to that a lot of other communities do not have to because things
Yeah.
are just given to them.
You know, I think we are, the rural areas of America are very innovative, and they have to be by force
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
or by necessity. But I also think if there's a problem to be solved in rural America, I think it has to have a solution that comes from within. People from outside can help, but I think
Yeah.
from within and us growing our communities, but also growing our ability to transform and change to be a better area, I think that comes from within, and I think it goes back to our roots of how our areas were settled and how we were raised and how we were kind of brought up. And I think it goes back to that innovative nature of we're going to be self-reliant, but we're all going to be in it together. And I think if you get all those pieces moving the same direction, which I think KVAC's done a great job, I think the sky's the limit on what you can do.
Now tying it to micro credentials and competence-based professional learning, what is the value then to rural community school districts or urban?
Well, you know, and I'll speak, you know, rural America is so diverse and different. Rural Kentucky is so diverse and different. And I think having a on-demand, personalized learning capability with micro-credentialing for teachers and professional learning, I think it is the key to changing how we train our teachers, but we onboard teachers into our school system as well. And I believe personally that in the technology and that has driven our current society, I think this on-demand, this approach of badging and being a part of learning and taking charge of that learning and being a leader in that learning, I think that's unbelievable, and I think that's an asset that rural communities can take hold of. And I also think it's very unique in the sense that each community can identify their needs, which may be totally different than a community school 5 miles down the road. So I think it's going to be personalized in that sense and very flexible.
So what do you see as the future of public K-12 education in the states that you serve?
Well, yeah, I think we're rapidly changing, and that's a good way. And I think we're becoming more flexible and able to adjust to the needs that our communities that we're serving that need us to be. And I think we're evolving to the point that we're connecting K-12 to jobs and that workforce demand. And I think that is I think when we look back 10 years from now, I think we're going to look at a major shift on our timeline of education in America, where we're kind of gone back to vocational ed, we've gone back to workforce development, and we've gone back to a greater emphasis on higher ed, but in different areas of higher ed, which I think is very important.
Okay, great. Well, Alan, appreciate all
Been
your
a
great
pleasure.
work. Nice
Yes,
seeing
sir.
you again, and thank you for coming to
Hey,
Kentucky.
thanks again. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.